It was the trial of the century. He had the president shake his hand in front of the jury. He was defended by members who would become in the cabinet. Like, this man, again, was just like failing upwards in life, honestly.
Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. And today we are chatting with Jonathan from the YouTube channel Civil War Week by Week. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we start chatting with Jonathan and asking him about his channel, and before we start emptying our glasses, I want to ask the listeners and watchers to help us out by leaving us a review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to the podcast. Feel free to reach out to us at thehistorybuzz.com, and don't forget to check out our other podcast, Talk with History, where Jen and I dive deeper into our Walk with History videos and give you a behind-the-scenes look at our history-based YouTube journey. Now, our guest today is Jonathan from Civil War Week by Week YouTube channel, currently just shy of 2,000 subscribers. So if you're listening to this, pause it, go subscribe to his channel, and get him to that 2,000 mark. And Jonathan is a self-described non-professional historian who has a passion for a variety of subjects, including the Civil War. So if you're looking for Civil War history, his channel is definitely the place to go. So how you doing tonight, Jonathan?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm just now working on my Gettysburg video.
Ooh.
Oh, right on.
Cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So Jonathan, can you tell us and the listeners kind of a little bit about yourself, maybe how you came to love history, and maybe eventually how that kind of turned into the YouTube channel?
Yeah, sure. I'm about to go to college, so my story's pretty short.
Okay.
What got me into history was my dad, and it's a stereotype that every dad is studying for a pop quiz on World War II. But my dad and I, we're not very good at talking. We're Irish, and one of the things we used to communicate with each other was old VHS tapes of a World War II documentary when I was like 4 or 5 and way too young to watch. But like, I thought it was cool because there were frozen dead bodies.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Explosions.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad asked me if I wanted to go to Russia to see the like dead bodies of frozen French soldiers. And I was like in kindergarten. I was actually working on kindergarten homework. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And I'm sure my therapist is thinking the same thing.
Wow.
But it's just, that's what got me into history. And then I just fell in love with history. It was my topic.
Yeah.
I didn't start out as good a student as I am now, though I'm sure my teachers would say I'm still not the best. But history was always my thing. It was a source of pride. And now my dad and I still talk about history. He was with me in Gettysburg when we were filming.
Oh, cool.
So it's always been a way to connect with people to me.
Right on. So how did, it sounded like you guys kind of did a lot of World War II type stuff. How did that venture into the Civil War topic that is your channel?
This is very weird. So what happened was, I'm going to kind of start with talking about how I started my channel.
Sure.
I went to a semester abroad in Israel. I'm Jewish and I wanted to get away from my parents.
Sure.
So I went to, and this was my sophomore year, which is interesting because COVID hit. And I was kicked out of Israel for COVID reasons, not anything else, thankfully. But I want to keep in touch with those people I was talking with.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things to talk about is the early Soviet Union, which is very different than what I talk about now.
Yeah.
So my first videos were about Jews in the early Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And then I finished my series on that. And I thought, well, what do I do now? And during this COVID time, there was a lot of talk about the Civil War with that movement. And I thought, hey, I could cover that. And my plan was just to cover the start of the war. I was going to go to Bull Run, and I was going to confidently end it saying, well, the Union's going to win, so goodbye. Mm-hmm. And that's how the series began. Unfortunately, I forgot to include part 1 of 32 in my title. So then someone just assumed I was going to do the entire war, and I didn't correct them.
Oh, wow. So you just kept rolling with it.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So how long, and now I have a whole bunch of questions now. So how long were you in Israel before they had to send you back here because of all the COVID stuff?
About 6 weeks.
Oh man. Like
yeah.
Are you going to try to go back ever?
Yeah. I have family in Israel.
Cool.
I have some very weird family in Israel. My aunt is Carolyn Glick. She is an attempted Israeli politician who's the only one of my family members who has a Wikipedia page. I'm just going to say this right now. Full disclosure, we don't agree on a lot of politics, so do not think I'm part of the New Right Party at all. No, but I plan on visiting her.
Okay.
I have some friends who want to join the IDF. I went to a Jewish community school, and I have 2 good friends who want to join the IDF, and I want to visit them.
Sure.
Hopefully not on the front lines, but maybe in the safety of Tel Aviv.
Yeah. Well, man, what a cool, interesting kind of piece of family history.
So you started out with Russia, and you talked about your dad wanting to take you to Russia. Did you actually go on that trip as a kindergartner?
So the funny thing, it actually comes to today, is my family has a policy that when we graduate high school, we could go on a trip. Okay. For the longest time, I wanted to go see the Eastern Front of World War II.
Okay. This
was one of my major topics of interests. And up until I started my Civil War channel, that was always the plan. I have never been to Russia. I'm certainly not going to go now because of the conflict and everything. Yeah. But instead of that, I got to go to VidCon. But I think my Russia days are over, though. If the American Civil War dies down, maybe I'll cover the Russian Civil War. That's a joke. I'm not committing to
that. You cover it real time. So now you said that you emphasized Russia from a Jewish perspective. Do you do the Civil War from a Jewish perspective? Is there a uniquely Jewish perspective for the Civil War?
Yes. I don't want to cram it in there, but I have admittedly focused on some more Jewish aspects.
Okay.
Like Grant's expulsion of Jews under his general order, which was due to basically him not understanding that Jews were a people and thought of it more as just an insult. So he just threw in Jew as a way of saying incredulous traitors when it's a real people.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's I covered the same time when the African Americans were allowed to join the military. There was also a chaplain order allowing Jewish chaplains. And I kind of wanted to just include that in there. So
how cool.
I push a little bit of more Judaism in there than the average Civil War person would. But I mean, I still have to cover the rest of it. I'm planning on covering the Civil War from Irish or German and Jewish perspectives, but I speak a little bit extra in there.
Yeah, I think it's unique. I haven't really thought about that.
So we actually, we talk about that all the time. That's super interesting to me because we talk about history, and history is factual. Right? It happened. You can't change it. But what does change is how people talk about it and the lens that they portray it through, the lens that they look it through, just like you were just talking about. So that's super interesting to me.
Yes.
And oh man, I could kind of dive down that rabbit hole for a little bit here, but I've got some questions that I want to ask.
I want to ask one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
So you're starting school. Where are you going to school?
I'm going to St. John's College in Annapolis.
Oh yeah,
and it's right by the Naval Academy. In case I needed to defect.
I'm very familiar with St. John's.
Congratulations! And
That's awesome.
Are you going to study history?
It all has. It's only one. It's a double major, double minor, or just in humanities. I plan on going into law in the end. I want to become a special education lawyer.
Cool.
That's awesome, John.
Right on. Yeah, I have some fond memories, a little bit fuzzy, in the lawn area there at St. John's. I think when the Naval Academy, they play them in cricket. They do it once a year. And it was never my company that actually did it, but the Naval Academy actually has a cricket team. It's one particular company that does it. I think it's 24th Company. And I think they play St. John's every year in cricket. I have no idea who wins or who loses. I don't think anybody really cares. That's awesome, man. Congratulations to you. Yeah. Well, so we're going to venture off into kind of our next segment here. This is a segment that we started with a friend of ours, and it's just kind of a fun way to broach any historical topic. So we like to lead into our first kind of true historical topic with a word association game. So I'm going to say a couple of words, and then eventually at the end, I'll explain how it relates to the topic at hand. So I'll say a word, and you just kind of say the first word or phrase or paragraph, as some of our friends have done.
That comes to mind.
That comes to mind. All right. If I was to say 1993, what would you think?
I would say Oslo Accords.
Okay. If I was to say Pennsylvania, what would you think?
I would probably think Gettysburg.
All right. If I was to say Abraham Lincoln, what would you think?
A hat.
Hat? That's a good one. If I was to say Pickett's Charge?
I would probably say Virginia.
Okay. And then all of that is leading actually into Gettysburg. You got me on the second word. So the reason I said 1993 is because the movie Gettysburg actually came out in 1993. So I was trying to kind of throw you off. It threw Jen off pretty decently.
It did.
I forget what you said for 1993.
I think I said like moving or like high school. God,
Yeah.
That's high school for me. And in Pennsylvania, I was like Penn State. That's where I got my undergrad.
Yeah.
And then he said Abraham Lincoln. I said Civil War.
And then Pickett's Charge.
He said Pickett's Charge. I said Gettysburg.
Was Gettysburg. So it's kind of serendipitous that you were just at Gettysburg and you're making some videos on Gettysburg. So what do you remember like initially learning of Gettysburg, and then what's something that kind of stands out to you about Gettysburg? One or two things that kind of stand out, because I'm sure we all have plenty to say on Gettysburg. So
yeah. Well, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, the Civil War was never my area of expertise until I started this series.
Okay.
So what I knew about Gettysburg was basically a video game I played called Ultimate General Civil War.
Okay.
So what I learned was I was very good at it. And I mean, I knew about the fishhook strategy and overall, but I think some of my favorite stuff about Gettysburg is just the story where everyone is just winging it.
Yeah.
It's just all this,
Yeah.
where I mean, like, oh, there's these grand generals. You have General George G. Meade, the savior of the Union, the snapping turtle, and Robert E. Lee, the invincible Virginian. And they're all just winging it. And I just love it where everyone's just dispatching orders and they're like, do this if you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do this if you think you should. And it's just this... It's like a puzzle piece where everyone has one puzzle piece and they each have a different picture. So it's just this chaos that, I mean, it's not unique to Gettysburg, but it is profoundly Gettysburg.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great perspective on Gettysburg that I don't think I've had someone tell me before. Now, I joke all the time, I'm not the history person in this team here, right? Jen's the historian, she's the history person. So what I remember of Gettysburg, like you, was I just kind of generally learned about it. Maybe Pickett's Charge, maybe that it was a very decisive battle, right? Beyond that, and when I was, going through high school, that's pretty much all I remember of it. And then I've learned more about it more as I've been doing the channel with Jen. And I like your description of, hey, everybody's just winging it. And I bet that's, to your point, that's probably true more often than not for a lot of the generals that are out there. Now, they're studied and they're experts, right? They have good strategies, but they're still just winging it. There's no, overall,
this was
true
no
answer.
plan. They didn't plan to meet at Gettysburg. It just kind of happened. And then it was kind of like, well, here we go. I think Pickett's Charge is the best example of that.
Yeah.
It's just like, just take it, just do it. And I mean, he even knew, well, we're all going to die, but okay, here we go,
Yeah. And Jen tends to love Gettysburg because we lived in Erie, Pennsylvania for a little bit, which is kind of the top the northwestern part of the state. And
Strong
Vincent, who was eventually died as a general. Is that right?
He was
a colonel. He was a colonel at Gettysburg.
And Abraham Lincoln promoted him to brigadier general right before he died.
Just before he died.
But he's my hero of Gettysburg because he's unsung. Chamberlain gets all the glory, but it's Vincent who put him in his place, told him to stand there and defend there. And it's Vincent who takes it upon himself to take Little Round Top because he sees that it's open and it's vulnerable. And even though the aide is running around, he's like, just tell me what you want me to do and I'll go up there. Was there anybody when you were at Gettysburg that you kind of learned about and you were like more appreciative of who they were and what they did?
Oh, yes. So I've been to Gettysburg twice.
Oh,
Once 2 days ago and
Yeah.
like 5 years ago before I even thought of doing the channel.
Yep.
And I learned about Daniel Sickles, who, if you watch my series, which no one does, I end every episode with covering what Daniel Sickles does because this man is just fascinating to me. He's the first ever temporary insanity plea, which I hope to never use as a lawyer if I do become one.
Sure.
He slept with the Spanish queen, brought a prostitute to meet the English queen. Like, this man to me seems to be like just winging it through life.
Yeah.
And I always learned Dan Sickles as the idiot of Gettysburg. He moved out of line. He opened up a salient. And then just reading through Gettysburg, I'm like, he's kind of right. Because it's just this personality of his at Chancellorsville, where his best friend basically told him, you're not allowed to move forward. The Confederates took that ground and opened up canister shot into the Union, decimating their line. And I would in that episode saying he's not going to make this mistake again. Mm-hmm. So here he is. He's in a swamp. And what he calls it a swamp, he's in a ditch, basically.
Yeah.
He wasn't, there weren't like alligators or anything.
Sure.
He just sees this high ground and he's like, can I please take it? And Meade says, no, you'll break the line. And he says, okay. Then he sees the enemy coming. He's like, I'm a corps commander. I basically have to do it. And he just goes for it. And I think it was overall a good idea. Most people don't.
Yeah.
I'm not a general, so I'm inclined to believe them. But
Sure.
I just love that kind of miniature character where it's not just the battle decision. It's also that past he has at Chancellorsville.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you learn from your mistakes. A lot of that. And wasn't Sickles the one who, like, somebody slept with his wife and then he killed him, and then that's where he does the insanity plea?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
The person who wrote the Star Spangled Banner had a son who slept with Sickles' wife while Sickles was away sleeping with other people.
Francis Scott Key's son?
So his son
Francis
slept with
Barton
Sickles.
Key.
Holy cow.
And then Sickles kills him.
And his wife.
Please insanity.
Yeah. Yeah. In front of the White House.
Yeah.
He slept with his wife who was half
my
Sickles'
gosh.
age.
Yes.
It was the trial of the century. He had the president shake his hand in front of the jury. He was defended by members who would become in the cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this man, again, was just like failing upwards in life, honestly.
That's a great way to describe. What an interesting. I mean, he sounds like someone they could make a Hollywood movie out of, and you would be like, "There's no way this is true." That's crazy. I've never heard of him before
because of that story.
Because of that one. Mm-hmm. So to your point, like, that's one of the things that I kind of like. Like, Jen likes she dives into all the topics that we're doing and stuff like that. Every now and then, just like you, and I think, Sickles, it sounds like he's probably a larger than life character, maybe not to his own doing, not to his own intent anyways. But I love those characters. Like you said, he's not the general. It's not necessarily the leader, but just this random character that kind of just stood out and shone a little brighter, for better or for worse, right? It sounded like Sickles was often for worse. But some of those characters that you're just like, man, what an interesting person in history that was just here, right? And just kind of did their own thing, marched to the beat of their own drum during a very kind of significant time in history. That's super, super interesting. He was probably there in Gettysburg while JD was there. If you were there 2 days ago.
Oh, yeah.
JD from the History Underground was just out there, I think, over the past couple days.
Yeah, he was doing some talks and stuff. He works a lot with the Museum of Gettysburg with their artifacts. If you've ever go, Jonathan, like if we ever meet up there sometime, they have a ton of artifacts there, like from the battlefield, and they have like stuff from Abraham Lincoln. They have
JFK stuff.
They have like mud with John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah.
When he makes like the cast for his leg, or they have
some really interesting
They have
stuff
all
there.
these like interesting little tidbits. It's a really cool place to go to see all the artifacts they have.
No, that's super interesting. Now I'm actually going to be curious to kind of.
Yeah, now
I need to go check out some of your videos about this guy, because now I'm just curious. So, knowing that you've already probably made a couple videos about him. So moving on to kind of our next question, Jonathan. One of the things we like to ask folks, because we get to talk to people that are kind of all over the country, and we're working on people all over the world, but the time zone differences make it challenging sometimes. So I like to ask, what's the first big historical event in your lifetime that you remember happening? National, global, something just with your family. We had someone tell a family thing. But what's the first big kind of historical event that you remember in your lifetime?
Mine would be the 2008 election.
Okay.
When I was 5.
Wow.
So what do you remember of that?
The Daily Show coverage, honestly, with Jon Stewart.
Oh yeah.
That it was constantly playing during dinner, and I just remember him and Stephen Colbert doing their back and forth.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
That's Obama and McCain, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what? Do
you remember election night?
Yeah. Do you remember election night? Like what other things do you remember that made that stand out to you?
It's got to be Stephen Colbert's ridiculousness. I believe he had a bird on his shoulder for some reason.
Yeah, that sounds right.
It's just that. Now, I mean, that's the thing I have fragrant memories of. The actual event I can fully remember is I come from the state of Missouri, which is in the middle of the country.
Yep.
And despite 9/11 happening very far away from us, it shook where I lived.
Yeah.
And I was told to look out for Osama bin Laden.
Oh, wow.
In Clayton, Missouri. He was not hiding there, it turns out.
Yeah.
But I was told to search for him, and 9/11 talks were constant, and we had all this stuff. So when President Obama made the report that we killed him, my dad called in my entire family to watch, and I remember that very clearly.
Huh. So are you saying that it was more the 9/11 event that you remember, or is more the actual when Osama bin Laden?
If you were 5 during the 2008 election, you weren't alive for 9/11, right?
I was not.
So you're saying that what you remember is when Osama bin Laden was killed?
Just the whole talk around it, and then when he was killed. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Which was that? When was that? That was 2015?
12 or 13.
13, yeah.
12 or 13?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay. So one of the things that I'm always curious about is is that kind of one of those moments to you where, hey, I've always heard about this, we'll just call him the boogeyman, right? Osama bin Laden was this kind of national, globally known bad guy, right, for a very long time. And at that moment, was it all your family coming together that all of a sudden you just kind of realize, hey, there's a bigger world out there, kind of pulled back the curtain? Like, what about that event or that night when your dad called your family in kind of really changed things?
To me, that event mattered because my family is very cynical. We are the most cynical people you ever know. The way my family talks about what we do, you would think we hate each other. And it was just this moment of, my family's not the most patriotic, which is surprising given what I do. But there was just this moment where it was where I felt like we were all on the same side for something. Oh. So to me, the event mattered because not even the election of Obama in 2008, which my family did support, brought us together, not any of that stuff. It was the fact we killed someone, which says a lot about our culture, honestly. But it was just this America moment, which is probably, rightfully satirized all over the place, but it was just this moment where I felt like we were all on the same team.
Yeah.
Aw, that's pretty cool.
That's really cool.
It was May 2nd, 2011. So so that's a moment where you see a lot of just coming together of your family. In that moment, you're probably what is the catalyst that's making us all pause for a moment, that's making us all come together, and you're realizing, it's the death of a really, really bad guy.
Yeah.
But it resonated with you, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think to kind of echo what you said, Jonathan, of for you it was your family coming together, right? And jokingly, right? It's about killing someone, but really what it is to kind of what Jen said and what you said together, right? It's your family coming together and everybody pausing to recognize one thing, right? So for, children, of the 70s and 80s, it could have been the Challenger explosion. For other folks, for me, it was an earthquake in California that shook it was one of the larger ones in California in the 80s. For other folks,
it could be 9/11.
Yeah, it could be 9/11, right? For our kids, it's probably going to be the pandemic, just because that's something that the entire world recognized it's not one singular event, but looking back, you can kind of clump it all together. So that's really interesting that
We
was
haven't heard that yet.
the moment for you. That's a new one for us. So thank you for sharing that with us.
So did you watch Zero Dark 30?
That was a great movie.
I have not.
You know more about what we did in the military. I was a helicopter pilot.
Yeah, Jen was a Navy helicopter pilot back in the day. So she used to actually she used to fly that kind of those kinds of missions. No, that's a really cool memory, and I think one of the other common themes that we've seen through learning to appreciate history and be passionate about history and historical events, it tends to be centered around family, or you tend to be near your family unit. And you're just kind of confirming that as another person sharing that first historical moment.
Thank you for sharing that.
Now you said you grew up in the Missouri area. That's funny because we've probably had 3 or 4 people that are from Missouri on the History Buzz so far, which is who knows, right?
It always touches my heart because that's where Brad Pitt's from.
Yeah, she's a huge Brad Pitt
All
fan.
All 4 of us.
But
that's about the population.
So one of the other things we like to ask our guests, but what's a bit of regional history that you might know from either growing up either in the Missouri area where you're at right now? And if I was to come and visit, I'd be like, I'd never heard of that, but it's common knowledge in your area, whether it's something you knew growing up or something that you've learned now that kind of stands out to you that's kind of more regional.
Well, common knowledge is interesting. I'm not entirely sure, but I can tell you something. I've, again, covered this, but no one watches my stuff. So I was in 2nd grade.
Okay.
Like most 2nd graders, I had a very weird teacher. I mean, every teacher's weird when you're that young.
Sure.
But this person was bigoted against Mormons.
Oh, interesting.
Specifically Mormons.
Huh.
And I didn't understand why, and I still don't. But she taught us about the Missouri Mormon War, one of the 3 Mormon wars. And I don't think a lot of people know about this except Mormons because it's pretty impactful.
Yeah, I only know about Nauvoo and Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, right? He was kind of killed there.
Yeah, so
that's in Illinois, though, right?
So tell us about the Missouri Mormon War.
So it turns out the Holy Land is in Missouri, which is confusing because I live here and I've been to the Holy Land in very different places, both desolate and very violent, but still.
Yeah.
And so Joseph West found it in our far west part, at Far West. The Garden of Eden, Zion. I'm not Mormon. I don't fully understand it. I tried to read some of their texts, but
Sure.
one theology is too much for me already.
Sure.
So he was there. And the thing about Missouri is we don't really care what you're doing as long as you don't rock the boat.
Sure.
Okay.
And he was rocking the boat. He was a political force. He was an economic force. And he was converting Native Americans. And those Native Americans who didn't want to be converted took revenge.
Oh, wow.
And also, it's the lead up to the Civil War. So slavery's on everyone's mind. And they basically say he's an abolitionist because he's from the Northeast. He wasn't. I don't want to get to the issue of slavery and Church of Latter-day Saints.
Right.
It has flooded my comment section.
Yeah.
But just to say, made up thing. So there's an election that they banned Mormons from illegally. You can't ban people based off their religion.
Sure.
Mormons come, there's a scuffle, there's a fight. The governor executes a genocidal order called the Missouri Extermination Order.
Holy
It's
cow.
not actually genocidal, it's just cleansing, where all Mormons have to leave. Now, Mormons don't want to leave the Holy Land
Sure.
of theirs, so we send in the Mormons fight a battle. They win against the Missouri State Militia.
Wow.
But you don't get to fight the government for long and win. Mm-hmm. So in the end, they encircle the Mormons and they say, we're going to disarm you and we're sending you to Illinois. And that sets the ground for the Illinois Mormon War, where Joseph Smith dies.
Joseph Smith dies. Okay, so that's one I know.
How interesting. I had never heard of that, right? I know very little kind of any sort of Mormon history or anything like that, other than like, kind of to your point, I don't really understand it, but that's okay.
Well, I grew up in Wyoming, and believe it or not, there's a lot of Mormons in Wyoming because it's so close to Utah.
Oh, sure.
You know, and so I would just learn it because a lot of your friends were Mormon.
Yeah.
So you just ask a lot of questions and you learn about it. Plus, I was a big Love fan.
The show.
Back in the day.
The Mormon show.
I don't know if you ever saw that, Jonathan. It was on HBO.
Yeah. So you learned that in second grade. How interesting that you had a teacher that kind of taught you guys that so young.
Well, it wasn't the most accurate version, if I remember. She just said that it was against, we shouldn't let Mormons in the state, despite the fact the order was rescinded. Whoa. She was like very revisionist of the history. She didn't like tell us all the reasons. She basically said Missourians don't like Mormons, and then
I see.
Wow.
We're like, okay, Mrs. D, sure. And then she just dismisses to recess or whatever.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Well, it is so interesting how much a teacher can influence you.
Yeah.
Right? Because they really do have a chance to nuance things. And they can be a major influencer. So you do have to, like, what are you teaching? How are you teaching it?
Sure.
You know, that's the same thing is so true about history, Jonathan. And you're going to see when you go through your studies and like, how do you discern what is the facts and how do you discern what's a bias, and are you looking through things with a bias, and how do you recognize your implicit bias? And so you're really going to go, you know, and you're going to see this a lot, but people are going to ask for sources and primary sources, and you're going to have to cite everything. And it can be almost writing like a second paper every time, but that builds your credibility as a historian.
Yeah. I don't even know how to process that Mormon Missouri War. Like it's such an interesting, that's a very regional, that's like a perfect example of why I like to ask this question, because I bet there's not many people outside of that part of Missouri, or maybe Missouri in general, maybe, right, that have learned about the Missouri Mormon War. So that's such a fun question for me to ask.
Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, it's become almost like a Mecca now for Mormons, right? Don't they want to come there to the Holy Land? And
yeah, but Missouri sold it to a breakaway group. So the main Mormon church doesn't own their Holy Land.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
A breakaway group does, and they all broke away after the death of Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
There were like 4 groups, but Missouri found a lasting way to screw over the main church. I feel like he's saying the main church is already setting me up for some sort of hate comment by a member of a different church. But let's just say the ones you think of, they don't own that land.
Right.
They have their main point across the street. They own a small building across the street from their own salvation.
Wow.
Well, I don't know if it's their salvation.
Their promised
main
land.
Holy Land.
Yeah.
They own basically a small shack facing their holiest place.
So they can look at it.
That was lasting damage. That was completely our bad.
Wow.
Holy cow. That's
so interesting.
That's super, super interesting. Jonathan, thank you again for joining us. So if people wanted to either kind of find you online or reach out to you, what's the best place for people to find you?
I only have YouTube, none of the or Instagram. It's just Civil War Week by Week is my channel.
Okay.
I also have a Discord with a link in the description.
Cool.
It's dead, so you could just reach me out either YouTube comments or DM me on Discord.
Okay. Thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast. And please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think that today's topic would interest a friend. Shoot them a text and tell them to look up the Talk with History podcast, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.